Everyone received gifts, except me. Mom laughed. Oh, we forgot to give you yours. They expected me to start crying. I smiled. It's okay. Look what I gifted myself. The room fell silent when they saw it. My name is Leah Kim. I'm 31 years old, and 5 years ago, I left Seattle without looking back. I worked as a back-end developer for a cybersecurity company that had contracts with major banks and government agencies. I wasn't just good at what I did. I was indispensable. I solved problems that other teams couldn't even describe. But outside of work, it was as if I didn't exist, at least to my family. We hadn't spoken since 2016. So when my cell phone vibrated on a quiet Wednesday in October 2023, I was surprised to see my cousin's name. Rachel was the only one who had my new number. Leah, she said in a soft voice, your parents are trying to contact you. They want you to come home for Christmas. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed in my small Brooklyn apartment. Now, I asked, after all these years? They've been asking about you, Rachel said. It seems like they're serious this time. I hung up and stared at the wall. I hadn't thought about my family for months. Years, actually. But the memories came back quickly. I was always the odd one, never the favorite. I remembered when I was 13, sitting in a cold office chair, knees to my chest, while Dr. Patel, my childhood psychologist, clearly told my parents, Leah's problems don't stem from isolation. They come from being ignored. My mother scoffed. We love all our children equally, but I knew it was a lie. My older brother, Dylan, was the charming one. Captain of the soccer team, student council president, the golden boy. They gave him a car when he turned 16. They gave me a used sweater that still smelled like someone else. Even at Christmas, Dylan's gifts shone under the tree. Mine seemed bought at the last minute, but this year, they were finally calling me back. And they had no idea who I had become. Family gatherings were always a nightmare. Dylan stole the attention. Charismatic, loud, charming. I faded into the background like another piece of furniture. Nobody noticed. That's when I discovered programming. It all started with an old flyer stuck on the school bulletin board. Introduction to Computing Club, Room 207, Thursdays after classes. I went once and never missed again. For the first time, I felt like something understood me. It wasn't people, it was the logic of code. The club became my refuge. We repaired old computers with pieces from the trash. We exchanged books, debated compilers, and stayed up late helping each other with bugs. I even developed my first game on a borrowed laptop. Professor Alvarez took me aside one day. You have a special talent, Leah, he told me. Don't let anyone make you feel less. By 17, I already had a plan. I applied to universities, left Seattle, and decided to build my future from scratch. Dylan, of course, was already at an elite university in California, with all the financial support from my parents. And then came that Thanksgiving dinner. My dad raised his glass to Dylan. Proud of you at Stanford, he said. Everyone toasted. Then Mom added, and Leah, we're encouraging her to look for a stable job. My uncle joked, we need dishwashers at the restaurant. The whole table burst into laughter, including my parents. I didn't laugh. What they didn't know was that I had already been accepted with a full scholarship to a top-tier technology program in New York. Tuition, housing, and even a stipend all covered. I packed quietly and moved to a dorm in Manhattan. I worked as a part-time waitress, graduated with honors, and landed my dream job at a cybersecurity firm before the ink dried on my diploma. 4 years later, I led a multi-million-dollar integration for a global bank. The bonus was enough to buy myself a property, so I called a real estate agent. In a few days, I found the ideal apartment in Fort Greene. 2 bedrooms, modern kitchen, exposed brick near the park. At 31, I was officially the owner of my own home. 2 weeks before Christmas, I had a small gathering to celebrate. Just my true friends, the ones who saw me stay up all night, cry over bugs in the code, and still keep going. We sat on cushions on the floor, eating Thai food with cheap wine, surrounded by unopened boxes and lots of laughter. Lisa raised her glass. To Leah, she said, the quiet one who turned silence into power. We toasted. I smiled. But there was a thought that wouldn't leave me. In a week, I would be going back home. But this time, I wasn't returning as the invisible girl. This time, I was coming back as someone who knew her worth. The week before Christmas, I took a few days off from work. I packed simple but intentional gifts and drove the 6 hours to my old neighborhood in North Seattle. The house hadn't aged well. Faded paint, untrimmed bushes, and a porch light that flickered like a dying memory. I rang the doorbell with trembling hands. Footsteps were heard, and then the door opened with a creak. Leah, my mom blinked. Wow, it is you. She gave me a brief, tense hug. You look different. Inside, the smell hit me. Old wood, stagnant air, and that eternal bowl of dry potpourri. The living room was full. Conversation stopped when everyone turned to look at me. Look who decided to show up, someone said. Is she wearing sweatpants? Whispered another voice. I looked down. Perfect cut black pants and a designer coat. Quiet luxury, clearly lost on this audience. Then Dylan came out of the kitchen, smiling. Everyone, this is Mia, my wife, and he pointed to her belly. Your future niece or nephew. Congratulations, I said. He smiled smugly, still locked away in a corner with your computer. Laughter was heard immediately. I felt my jaw tighten. I work in tech, I responded calmly. If you ever came home with more power than they could imagine, subscribe. because the next part of this story changes everything. Tech? Dylan scoffed. Like fixing printers or answering support calls? He turned to the others. Leah was always the weird one. Probably works from a dark basement. I smiled slightly. Something like that. Mom clapped. Dinner will be ready soon. Leah, leave your things. Dylan is using your room as an office now, so you'll sleep on the couch. Of course. Obviously, the night was a slow rain of condescension. Aunt Nora cornered me by the watery punch. Your brother is going to launch his own business. He has an incredible vision, and you're still doing that computer thing? I developed software, I replied. She wrinkled her nose. Oh, well, somebody has to do the boring stuff. Uncle Mike leaned in while dinner was being prepared. We still have a dishwasher position open at the restaurant. It's minimum wage, but it's honest work. Thank you, I replied politely. I'm fine. At dinner, they seated me at the end of the table, near the kitchen door. As always, Dylan dominated the conversation. This is going to revolutionize the market, he declared. We just need the initial capital to get started. How much do you need? Dad asked. About $150,000 to start, Dylan replied, giving me a challenging look. It's a lot of money, but the risk is worth it. My father nodded as if he were listening to the theory of relativity explained by Einstein himself. I bit my lower lip to keep from laughing. I'm sure we can arrange something, my father said. We could mortgage the house. We've always believed in you, son. I felt a lump in my throat. I remembered when I asked for $500 for an advanced programming course. They told me money doesn't grow on trees. Aunt Carmen raised her glass. To the future entrepreneur of the family. Everyone toasted enthusiastically. No one looked at me. After dinner, while everyone gathered in the living room to exchange gifts, I slipped away to the kitchen. I needed a breather. I took out my phone and checked my emails. 3 security alerts that required my attention. Nothing I couldn't resolve remotely. My mother came in balancing a stack of dirty dishes. You could help a little, don't you think? She said in that tone I knew so well. Of course, I replied, putting my phone away. You should be out there socializing, she continued, as she opened the dishwasher. You've been missing for years, and now you're hiding in the kitchen. I began rinsing the dishes in silence. I thought about telling her I wasn't hiding, but taking a moment to breathe amid the avalanche of condescending comments. But I knew it was useless. Well, she asked, after a moment, how are you really doing? Rachel mentioned you live in New York. I'm doing well, I replied dryly. Still working in that computer thing? Yes, Mom. I still work in that computer thing. She sighed as if I had confirmed a family tragedy. At least you have stable work, I suppose. At that moment, Dylan entered the kitchen with an empty wine bottle. He left it on the counter without even looking at me. Mom, we're opening the gifts. Everyone is waiting. She dried her hands immediately. Of course, honey. And then, as if remembering my existence, she added, Leah, finish with the dishes and come when you can. I watched as they left together, animatedly talking about the latest gift Dylan had bought for Mia. Something broke inside me. It wasn't the same old slights. It was the bitter confirmation that despite the years, nothing had really changed. To them, I was still the same invisible girl. I finished with the dishes and slowly headed to the living room. Everyone was seated, in a circle, surrounded by torn wrapping paper and shiny ribbons. My father was wearing a new sweater, obviously a gift from Dylan. My mother was admiring a necklace hanging from her neck. The aunts and uncles exchanged cards with pleased smiles. I stood in the doorway, observing the family scene that had always made me feel like a stranger. The small bag with the gifts I'd brought remained untouched next to my suitcase. Dylan saw me and smiled smugly. Ah, Leah, we're almost done. Did you bring anything for the family after so long? All eyes fixed on me. I felt the blush rising up my neck. Yes, I replied, approaching to take my bag. I brought some things. I began distributing my gifts, a cashmere scarf for Mom, a book on navigation history for Dad, his only passion besides Dylan, a tea set for Aunt Carmen, and so on. Small but carefully chosen gifts. For Dylan and Mia, I had brought a handcrafted musical mobile for the baby. Thank you, my mother said, examining the scarf with bewilderment, as if it were an alien object. It looks expensive, Aunt Nora commented, gently touching the material. It was nothing, I replied. Dylan unwrapped the mobile and looked at it confused. Was this made by children in a workshop? It's handcrafted from an artist collective in Brooklyn, I explained. Each piece is handmade. He let out a nasal laugh. Sure, very New York. We prefer practical things, right, Mia? His wife nodded automatically, though I could see her eyes lingering on the carved pieces of the mobile with genuine interest. Well, my father said, checking his watch, I think we're done with the gifts. Everyone received gifts except me. Mom laughed. Oh, we forgot to give you yours. They expected me to start crying. I smiled. It's okay. Look what I gifted myself, I said, taking out my phone. I opened an app and showed the photos of my apartment in Fort Greene. The room fell silent when they saw it. Is that yours? My mother asked, leaning in to see better. Yes, I bought it 3 months ago, I replied naturally, sliding my finger to show more photos. 2 bedrooms, renovated kitchen near the park. Dylan let out a forced laugh. You must be up to your neck in debt. Not really, I replied. I paid for it almost entirely. The company gave me a quite generous bonus last year for an integration project. I led. Bonus? My father frowned as if the word was new to him. What kind of integration? Asked Uncle Mike, surprising me with his genuine interest. Banking security, I explained. I developed an authentication protocol that is now used by several international banks. An uncomfortable silence settled in the room. I could see the confused expressions, the exchanged glances, the general bewilderment. But suddenly someone else spoke. It was my Aunt Carmen, the youngest of my mother's sisters, always somewhat marginalized herself. You work for a bank? She asked. Not exactly, I replied. Our company develops security systems that banks implement. I'm the technical lead for the back-end team. Dylan snorted. And what does that really mean? It means, Uncle Roberto intervened, that your sister probably earns more money than you'll see in your lifetime. His comment surprised me. Roberto had always been the quiet one, the one who observed from the corners at family gatherings. I didn't know he understood technology. Roberto looked at me with a discreet smile. My nephew works in technology too, he explained. He always talks about the people revolutionizing digital security. He mentioned your name once, but I never connected the dots. My name? I asked, disconcerted. Leah Kim, the architect behind the KimAuth protocol, right? The one that solved the vulnerabilities in two-factor authentication systems? I felt my heart racing. Yes, that's my work. The expression of disbelief on my father's face was priceless. Are you saying that Leah is famous? In certain circles, Roberto replied. My nephew says the best security developers in the country know her work. Dylan stood up abruptly. I'm going for more wine, he muttered, clearly uncomfortable with the turn the conversation had taken. My mother seemed genuinely perplexed. But you never told us. You never asked. I replied simply. The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the uncomfortable silence from before, but one charged with realization of uncomfortable truths finally faced. Cousin Rachel, who had remained quiet all night, finally spoke. I always knew you would go far, Leah, since we were children. I smiled at her with gratitude. She had been the only one who really saw me in those years. My father cleared his throat, visibly uncomfortable. Well, we always knew you were smart. We were just worried that, well, that you were alone with your computers. I have friends, Dad, I said calmly. Good friends and a job I love. I'm not alone. And then, as if the universe wanted to emphasize my point, my phone rang. It was a video call from Lisa and the rest of my friends in New York. Leah, they shouted in unison when I answered. How's the family reunion going? Their smiling faces filled the screen. A mosaic of different colors and expressions, all united by genuine affection. It's interesting, I replied, turning the camera to show them the room full of silent relatives. Hello, Leah's family, Lisa greeted cheerfully. We just wanted to wish you happy holidays and tell you that you have an amazing woman in your family. We miss her here in New York. Lisa had always been the extrovert of the group. She continued, did you know that our Leah has just been nominated for next year's Turing Award? It's like the Nobel Prize for computing. My father almost choked on his drink. Award what? It's not that big a deal, I said, feeling the blush rise to my cheeks. It's just a preliminary nomination. Just a nomination! Lisa dramatically rolled her eyes. Derek, you tell them. Derek, my colleague and friend since college, adjusted his glasses with that nervous gesture so characteristic of his. Leah's nomination is a great achievement. Her work in quantum cryptography has revolutionized the field. Few developers achieve that recognition before 40. I watched as my mother slowly sank into the sofa, as if her legs could no longer support her. I quickly said goodbye to my friends, promising to call them later, and put my phone away. The silence in the room was deafening. Dylan returned with the wine, clearly having heard part of the conversation from the kitchen. His expression was a mixture of disbelief and something I had never seen on his face when he looked at me. Grudging respect. Pour me some of that wine, would you? I asked him with a slight smile. For the first time in my life, he did what I asked, without sarcastic comments. The conversation for the rest of the night was different. The questions now were directed at me, not Dylan. How exactly did my work function? What did quantum cryptography mean? Was it true that banks depended on my systems? I answered patiently, simplifying complex concepts, watching as my family's eyes opened with each explanation. Even Dylan listened attentively, though he pretended to be more interested in his phone. When I finally decided to go to bed, my mother stopped me in the hallway. Leah, wait, she said with a faltering voice. Dylan can sleep on the couch. You take your old room. I shook my head. I'm fine on the couch, Mom. But now we know you're important, she insisted, and the transparency of her change in attitude almost made me laugh. I always was important. Mom, I replied softly. You just didn't see it? I left her there, standing in the hallway, digesting my words. That night, lying on the uncomfortable couch, I checked work emails on my phone. There was a notification from a Swiss bank interested in implementing our protocol, another professional success that would go unnoticed by my family until it was too big to ignore. But I no longer cared. I hadn't come seeking their approval. I had come to close a chapter. chapter, to face the ghosts of the past, and in a way, I had succeeded. The next morning, breakfast was a surreal experience. My father served me coffee without my asking. My mother offered me the last muffin. Dylan asked me with genuine interest about trends in cybersecurity. You know, he said while spreading butter on his toast, maybe you could advise me on security for my startup. I could, I replied, sipping my coffee. What exactly is your business about? Dylan explained his idea, a platform to connect local delivery services with independent restaurants. It wasn't revolutionary, but it had potential. The security plan is pretty basic, he admitted. We don't have a budget for anything sophisticated. Security shouldn't be an add-on, I told him. It should be integrated from the beginning. I can put you in touch with some junior developers from my team. Maybe they can help you as a side project. The expression of relief on his face was evident. That would be amazing, he said. It was strange to see Dylan vulnerable, grateful, as if he suddenly saw me as an equal, or even as someone to admire a little. After breakfast, while helping my mother with the dishes, this time she washed and I dried, a subtle but significant change, she broke the silence. We never understood what you did, she admitted quietly. It seemed so abstract. I know, I replied. We were proud of Dylan because we could understand his achievements. Team captain, student president, they were tangible things. I nodded, letting her continue. But last night, when your uncle explained your work and your friends called, I realized that we've been wrong all this time. I looked at her, surprised by her honesty. I don't expect you to forgive me, she continued, rubbing a plate that was already clean with too much force. I just want you to know that I'm proud of you. Late, but proud. The words I had always wanted to hear. But curiously, I didn't need them as much as before. Thank you, Mom, I replied simply. Later that day, as I was packing to return to New York, my father appeared in the doorway of the living room. Your mother told me you bought your apartment, he commented, as if it was no big deal. I nodded, folding a sweater. And that award your friends mentioned, is it important? Quite, I replied. But as I said, it's just a preliminary nomination. He nodded, processing the information. Then he took something out of his pocket. It was a small package, clumsily wrapped in crumpled gift paper. We forgot to give you this last night, he said, extending it to me. I took it cautiously and unwrapped it. It was an old framed photograph. Me at 16, sitting in front of a computer at the school science fair. I remembered that day. I had won second place with a pattern recognition program I had developed on my own. No one from my family had attended. I kept it, my father said, in a tone I couldn't decipher. I always knew you were special in my way. I didn't know what to say. Years of indifference weren't erased with a belated gesture, but it was a start, I guess. Thank you, Dad, I finally said. When I finished packing, I found Dylan on the front porch, smoking a cigarette in secret like when we were teenagers. I didn't know you still smoked, I commented, putting my suitcase on the ground. Only when I'm nervous, he admitted. Mia would kill me if she knew. We stood in silence for a moment, contemplating the sleeping neighborhood under the weak winter light. I always envied you, you know, he said suddenly. I looked at him, sure I had misheard. What? I envied you, he repeated, exhaling a cloud of smoke. You knew what you wanted since you were little. I just did what was expected of me. But you were the favorite, I pointed out, the center of attention. He shrugged. Attention isn't always freedom, Leah. You built your path. I just followed the one they laid out for me. I had never considered things from that perspective. For me, Dylan had always been the privileged one, the adored one, while I struggled to be seen. I never thought he might feel trapped in his own role. It's not too late to find your own path, I told him. He smiled ironically. With a baby on the way and a mortgage? Maybe. But at least now I have a successful sister who can give me business advice. His tone was light, but I detected a genuine respect that had never been there before. My taxi arrived shortly after. The farewell was less awkward than I expected. My mother hugged me longer than necessary, whispering a "come back soon" that sounded sincere. My father gave me a handshake that awkwardly turned into a brief hug. The aunts and uncles said goodbye with a new interest in keeping in touch. Dylan walked me to the taxi. Good luck with the nomination, he said. Really? Thanks, I replied. I'll send you the contacts for your startup when I get back to New York. As the taxi drove away, I looked through the back window, my family grouped on the porch, waving goodbye. It was an image I never thought I'd see. Them watching me leave, wishing I would return. The way back to New York was quiet. I processed everything that had happened, the subtle changes and the dramatic ones, the words said and the ones implied. My phone vibrated with a message from Rachel. You were amazing. You left them speechless. Call me when you get home. Home. The word resonated in my mind. For so long, Seattle had been a place to escape from, not a home to return to. But now, maybe it could be both. When I finally arrived at my apartment in Brooklyn, I felt exhausted but at peace. I dropped my suitcases at the entrance and poured myself a glass of wine. My phone rang again. It was an email from the Turing Award Committee requesting additional information about my work. I would answer it tomorrow. I approached the window and contemplated the city lights. I remembered that night 5 years ago when I looked at these same lights for the first time from my small shared student room. Back then, they were lights of hope, of infinite possibilities, of a future I could build with my own hands. Now they were the lights of my home, of my victory. My phone rang once more. It was Lisa. Did you survive the family reunion? She asked as soon as I answered. More than that, I replied, sipping my wine. I think they finally saw me. About time, she said with a warm laugh. Are you coming to our post-Christmas dinner tomorrow? Derek will make his famous risotto. I wouldn't miss it for anything. After hanging up, I opened my laptop and checked some code I had left pending before the trip. Everything seemed in order. The security system I had designed was working perfectly, protecting data for millions of people without them even knowing it. It was strange to think that my silent work had more impact on the world than any grandiloquent speech or flashy title. Maybe that was the lesson. True power isn't always loud. Sometimes, like the code I wrote, it operates in the shadows, structuring the world in ways few can see, but all experience. My apartment was quiet, but I didn't feel alone. The memories of the past few days danced in my mind like snowflakes. My father's surprised face, my mother's awkward hug, the reluctant admiration in Dylan's eyes. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the invisible girl begging to be seen. I felt like the woman I had always been, strong, capable, valuable. I opened the small package my father had given me. The photograph from the science fair transported me to that day. I remembered the excitement of seeing my program working perfectly, the pride when the head judge congratulated me on my innovation. I also remembered the empty chair where my family should have been, and how Professor Alvarez had taken me for ice cream afterward to celebrate my second place. I placed the photograph on my bookshelf, next to my diplomas and professional recognitions, not as a reminder of what I had missed, but as testimony to how far I had come since then. My cell phone vibrated with a text message. It was Dylan. I talked to Mia about what you said. You're right. It's not too late to find my own path. Thanks for the advice, little sis. I smiled reading those words. Little sis. I couldn't remember the last time he had called me that without a mocking tone. I replied, anytime. The contacts for your startup will arrive tomorrow. Then I added, and congratulations again on the baby. You'll be a good father. Because despite everything, I believed it. Dylan wasn't perfect, but he wasn't the villain I had built in my mind all these years either. He was just a man trapped in others' expectations, just as I had been trapped in invisibility. That night I slept deeply, without the restless dreams that used to haunt me after thinking about my family. The next morning, I woke up with renewed energy and a clarity I hadn't felt in a long time. As I prepared my coffee, I received an email from an unexpected sender, my mother. The subject simply said, your room. I opened it with curiosity. There was a brief message. Leah, we're thinking of renovating your old room. It won't be Dylan's office anymore. We want you to have a place here when you visit. What color would you like for the walls? Mom, I stared at the screen, moved by this small but significant gesture. It wasn't an elaborate apology or a grand declaration. It was something more valuable, an acknowledgement of my place in the family, a space reserved for me. I replied, mint green would be nice. Thank you, Mom. Then I added a postscript. I'll be in Seattle for a conference in March. I could stay a few extra days. I sent the email and looked out the window. Outside, New York was beginning to wake, up under a gray winter sky. My phone rang with a notification from work. They had approved my proposal for the new security protocol I had been working on for months. I smiled. Life continued with its daily challenges and triumphs, but something fundamental had changed. I no longer carried the invisible weight of the ignored child. I had left it behind, along with the resentment and pain accumulated over years. It wasn't about my family finally recognizing my worth. It was about me recognizing it first and building a life that reflected that truth. The rest, as a programmer would say, was just redundant code. My phone rang again. It was a reminder for the team meeting at 9 a.m. The technical lead had to be present and prepared. I finished my coffee, closed my laptop, and took my coat. It was time to return to the job I loved, with the people who valued me, in the city I had chosen as my home. In the elevator, a neighbor greeted me cheerfully. Merry Christmas, Leah. How was the visit to your family? I thought for a moment before answering. Revealing, I said finally. Very revealing. As I walked through the streets of Brooklyn, toward the subway station, I felt a new lightness in my steps. The gray sky above my head was beginning to open, revealing glimpses of bright blue. A new day, a new beginning. In my pocket, my phone vibrated once more. It was Rachel. You know what? I think you should come for New Year's too. The look on everyone's faces when you told them about your work was priceless. Plus, your uncle, Roberto, wants to introduce you to his nephew, the one who works in technology. He says you're his hero. I smiled. Maybe I would. Or maybe I'd invite Rachel to New York to show her my world. The possibilities stretched before me like lines of code waiting to be written. As I waited for the train, I reflected on the strange journey my life had been. From the invisible girl in Seattle to the respected woman in New York. From imposed silence to my own voice. From family rejection to professional recognition. And now, perhaps, toward a reconciliation reconciliation I never thought possible. The train arrived with a metallic roar, pulling me from my thoughts. The doors opened and I entered, mixing with the human tide of morning workers. In my mind, the pieces of the new security protocol were already starting to fit together like a complex but fascinating puzzle. I was good at what I did. I was valued for it. And now, for the first time, I felt that those truths resonated in both my professional life and my personal history. The train moved roaring through the tunnels, carrying me toward the day that was beginning, toward the future I had built with my own hands, line of code by line of code, a future that was no longer defined by what I lacked, but by everything I had achieved. And that, more than any belated family recognition, was my true victory. 3 months later, as I was packing for my trip to Seattle, I received a notification that would change my career forever. I had been selected as a finalist for the Turing Award. My team organized an impromptu celebration at the office. Cheap champagne in plastic cups, sincere hugs, and a card signed by everyone. "We always knew you were exceptional," my boss told me, raising his glass. "The world is just taking its time to realize it." That night, as I finished packing, I called my parents to confirm my arrival. "I have news," I told them after the initial greetings. I told them about the nomination, explaining in simple terms what it meant in my field. It's like winning an Oscar, but for computing, I tried to simplify. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard my father's voice, hoarse with emotion. "I always knew you were special, Leah," he said, "since you were little." It wasn't true, of course. He had never known it. Or if he had intuited it, he had never shown me. But now he wanted to believe it, and I wanted to let him believe. "Thank you, Dad," I replied simply. "Your room is ready," my mother interjected. "Mint green, as you asked, and I cleaned your old desk. I thought maybe you'd want to work a bit while you're here." The gesture moved me more than I expected. It wasn't just a painted room. It was an acknowledgement of who I was now. "That would be perfect," I said. "Dylan and Mia are coming for dinner on Sunday," my mother continued. "They want to show you the ultrasounds of the baby, and your Uncle Roberto insists that you meet his nephew." I smiled. Life takes curious turns. 5 years ago, I had escaped from Seattle swearing not to look back. Now I was returning, not as the invisible girl desperate for approval, but as a confident woman recognized in her field, owner of her destiny. "See you tomorrow, then," I said goodbye. As I hung up, I looked around my Brooklyn apartment, the modern and clean spaces, the view of the city that never sleeps, the technical books, stacked next to science fiction novels. All this was my home, my refuge, the place I had built for myself. But maybe, just maybe, I could also start to feel at home in other places, in a mint green room in North Seattle, in the awkward but honest conversations with my family, in the small reconciliations that day by day were healing old wounds. My phone rang one last time that night. It was a message from Dylan with an attached photo. It showed a small office decorated with plants and a modern desk. "My new workspace," the message said. "Following your advice about starting small but dreaming big. Do you think it will work?" I replied, "It's a good start, and that's all you need." Because if I had learned anything on my journey, it was that beginnings, however small, contain the potential for extraordinary transformations. Like a simple line of code that can change an entire system. Like an invisible girl who can become a woman impossible to ignore. I turned off the lights in my apartment and took one last look around before closing the door. Tomorrow, I would board a plane to Seattle not as a reluctant visitor, but as someone ready to build new bridges. The flight to Seattle was smooth, giving me time to prepare both for my conference presentation and the family dynamics awaiting me. I scrolled through the slides of my keynote speech, making small adjustments, trying not to think too much about the emotional journey ahead. When I landed, I was surprised to see my father waiting at the arrivals gate, holding a small handwritten sign with my name. He looked older than I remembered from Christmas, more vulnerable somehow. "Dad?" I approached him, wheeling my carry-on. "I was going to take a taxi." He smiled awkwardly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "I thought, well, your mother thought it would be nice if I picked you up." The drive from the airport was filled with his attempts at technical conversation. "So this conference you're speaking at, is it about that authentication protocol thing you created?" "Partly," I explained, watching the familiar Seattle landscape pass by. "I'm presenting our new approach to quantum-resistant encryption algorithms." He nodded as if he understood, though I knew he didn't. But unlike before, he was trying. "Your mother's been reading articles about you online," he said after a moment of silence. "She printed some of them, put them on the refrigerator." I laughed, imagining my complex technical papers displayed between grocery lists and takeout menus. "That's sweet. She's trying, Leah," he said softly. "We both are." When we arrived at the house, I noticed small changes. Fresh paint on the porch, new curtains in the windows, the garden tidied up. Signs of effort, of renewal. My mother greeted me with a warmer hug than at Christmas. "Your room is ready," she said, leading me upstairs. "I hope you like it." The mint green walls were exactly as I had requested, but what caught my attention was my old desk, restored and polished, with a new ergonomic chair and a small potted succulent. On the wall above it, framed in simple black, was a printout of the journal where my Kim-Auth protocol had first been published. "Roberto helped me find it online," my mother explained, noticing my surprise. "I didn't understand a word, but your name was right there on the first page." I touched the frame gently. "Thank you, Mom." That night at dinner, it was just the three of us. My father had grilled salmon, my favorite, though I couldn't remember ever telling him that. My mother had prepared roasted vegetables and fresh bread. "Dylan and Mia will come on Sunday," she said, passing me the bread basket. "They're very excited to see you." "Dylan's been asking a lot about your work," my father added. "I think he's genuinely interested." We ate in a comfortable silence that would have been unimaginable months ago. After dinner, my mother brought out a photo album I had never seen before. "I've been putting this together," she said, opening it on the coffee table. Inside were photos of me growing up, many I didn't even know existed. Me at 7, concentrated on a puzzle. At 10, reading under a tree. At 16, focused on a computer screen. "I realized we have so few pictures of you smiling," my mother said quietly. "You were always so serious, so contained. I think now I understand why." I felt a lump in my throat. "I wasn't unhappy, Mom, just invisible." "Not anymore," my father said with unexpected fierceness. "Not ever again." The next morning, I woke early to prepare for my conference keynote. I found my mother in the kitchen making coffee. "I thought you might need this," she said, handing me a steaming mug. "Roberto's nephew, Mateo, will be at your talk today. He's very excited to meet you." I sipped the coffee, surprisingly good. "I'm a bit nervous, actually." My mother looked genuinely surprised. "You? But you must do this all the time." "Not in my hometown," I admitted. "Not with family, possibly. Watching." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand briefly. "You'll be brilliant, Leah. You always were." The conference center buzzed with activity when I arrived. I was led to a green room where I could review my notes one last time before the presentation. A text came through from Rachel. "Killing it today, cousin. Uncle Roberto and Mateo are already seated in the front row." I smiled, appreciating her support, then switched my phone to silent mode. As I waited to be called to the stage, I thought about how much had changed in a few months. The ignored daughter was now the keynote speaker, with family members proudly in attendance. The introduction was flattering, detailing my achievements in ways that still made me uncomfortable. Leading innovator in cybersecurity, revolutionary, approach to authentication protocols, nominee for the prestigious Turing Award. Walking onto the stage, I spotted Uncle Roberto immediately, sitting beside a young man I assumed was Mateo. In the third row, surprisingly, sat my father, looking both out of place and fiercely proud. "Good morning," I began, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Today I want to talk about the invisible architecture that protects our digital lives." For the next hour, I explained complex security concepts, making them accessible without oversimplification. I spoke about the future of encryption in a quantum computing era, about the ethical implications of security design, about the human element that no algorithm could fully account for. Throughout, my father remained attentive, though I knew most of the technical details were beyond his grasp. What mattered was that he was there, witnessing a part of my life he had previously dismissed. After the applause and the Q&A session, I was surrounded by colleagues and conference attendees. Through the crowd, I saw my father hanging back, waiting patiently. When I finally reached him, he simply said, "I didn't understand most of it, but you were amazing up there." Uncle Roberto approached with Mateo, who turned out to be a brilliant security researcher himself. "Ms. Kim," he said, extending his hand, "your work on the Kim-Auth protocol changed the trajectory of my research. It's an honor to meet you." "Please call me Leah," I replied, shaking his hand. "I'd love to hear about your research. Maybe over dinner sometime?" Mateo suggested, with a smile that made my father raise an eyebrow beside me. I found myself smiling back. I'd like that. The rest of the conference day passed in a blur of presentations, networking, and unexpected moments of professional recognition. By evening, I was exhausted but exhilarated. When I returned to my parents' house, I found my mother waiting with dinner kept warm in the oven. "Your father told me how wonderful you were," she said, "though he said he didn't understand a word." I laughed, serving myself a plate of her lasagna. "That's okay. He showed up. That means more than understanding the technical details." My mother sat across from me, watching me eat with a tenderness I wasn't used to from her. "Leah," she said, softly, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said at Christmas, about being invisible." I nodded, letting her continue. "I want you to know that I see you now. I'm sorry it took so long. I put down my fork, emotion catching me off guard. Thanks, Mom. And about this Mateo, she continued, a hint of her old self returning. Roberto says he's very accomplished and single. I groaned, but with a smile. Some things would never change, and perhaps that was okay too. Sunday arrived quickly, and with it came Dylan and Mia for the promised family dinner. Dylan greeted me with a genuine hug, the first in perhaps decades. The startup's taking shape, he told me excitedly. Those developers you connected me with have been incredible. One of them even agreed to come on as CTO once we secure funding. That's great, Dylan, I replied, genuinely happy for him. What about the security infrastructure? Working on it, he said. Actually, I was hoping we could talk about that today. I've got some questions about API authentication. My brother was asking for my professional advice. The irony wasn't lost on me. Mia showed me the ultrasound pictures, pointing out features that looked to my untrained eye like abstract art more than a baby. It's a girl, she told me with a glowing smile. A niece, I said, suddenly emotional at the idea of this new family member who would never know the old dynamics, who would grow up seeing her Aunt Leah as the successful tech expert she was. We were thinking, Mia said hesitantly, looking at Dylan. If you wouldn't mind, we'd like to give her your name as her middle name. I stared at them in shock. My name? Dylan nodded. Emma Leah Wilson. If that's okay with you? I blinked back unexpected tears. I'd be honored. Dinner was filled with conversation that flowed more naturally than I could ever remember in this house. Dylan talked about his startup challenges. I shared stories. From my team in New York, Mia discussed her plans for the nursery, and my parents listened to it all with engaged interest. When the apple pie was served for dessert, my father cleared his throat. Your mother and I have been talking, he began. We've decided to help Dylan with his startup funding. I held my breath, waiting for the old pattern to reassert itself. But, he continued, we'd like your input, Leah, professionally, to make sure it's a sound investment. I exhaled slowly. They were asking for my expertise, acknowledging my judgment. Of course, Dad, I'd be happy to review the business plan. And, my mother added, we've also been thinking about setting up a small scholarship at your old high school for girls interested in computer science. I looked at her in surprise. Really? She nodded. We thought maybe it could be named after you, the Leah Kim Scholarship for Innovation, if you're comfortable with that. I was speechless, overwhelmed by this gesture that acknowledged not just who I had become, but who I had always been. I think that's a wonderful idea, I finally managed. After Dylan and Mia left, promising to meet again before I returned to New York, I sat with my parents in the living room, a comfortable silence between us. I have something to tell you both, I said eventually. I've been offered a position to lead a new quantum security division. It would mean relocating. My mother's face fell slightly. Back to New York? I shook my head. To Seattle, actually. The company's setting up a new research center here. The hope that bloomed on their faces was almost painful to witness. Would you consider it? My father asked cautiously. I looked around the living room where I had felt invisible for so many years, now transformed into a space where reconciliation seemed possible. I'm seriously considering it, I admitted. I'd still keep my place in Brooklyn, but it might be nice to come home. My mother reached for my hand, and this time I didn't pull away. The following week passed quickly. I had dinner with Mateo, which turned into coffee the next day, which led to him showing me around the Seattle Tech District that had evolved dramatically since I'd left. I met with the company offering me the position, toured their facilities, and was impressed by their vision for the quantum security division I would potentially lead. On my last night in Seattle, as I packed for my flight back to New York, my father knocked on my bedroom door. Got a minute? He asked. I nodded, setting aside the shirt I was folding. He sat on the edge of the bed, looking suddenly old and uncertain. I owe you an apology, Leah, not just for Christmas, but for all of it, for not seeing you. Dad, he held up his hand. Please, let me say this. I was wrong. I favored Dylan because he was easy to understand. His achievements made sense to me. Yours were beyond me, and instead of admitting that, I dismissed them. I sat beside him, our shoulders almost touching. I'm not asking you to move back for us, he continued. You should do what's best for your career. But I want you to know that if you do come back, things will be different. I promise you that. I leaned my head against his shoulder, a gesture I couldn't remember ever making before. I know, Dad. The next morning, my mother drove me to the airport. As we approached the departures terminal, she asked, have you decided about the job? Not yet, I admitted, but I'm leaning towards taking it. She nodded, trying not to look too pleased. Whatever you decide, we're proud of you. I wish we'd said that years ago, but we're saying it now. I hugged her goodbye, surprised by how natural it felt. On the flight back to New York, I reviewed the job offer details again. The position was perfect professionally, cutting-edge research, a substantial budget, freedom to build my own team, and personally, the chance to rewrite the narrative of my relationship with Seattle, with my family. When I landed, said. My Brooklyn apartment welcomed me with its familiar comfort. I dropped my suitcases and opened the windows, letting in the city sounds I had grown to love. My phone rang. It was Lisa. So, how was Family Reunion Part 2? Still awful? I smiled, looking at the skyline of the city that had given me refuge when I needed it most. Actually, I replied, it was healing. Does that mean you're taking the Seattle job? She asked directly. I think I am, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. Not because I need their approval anymore, but because I want to write a new chapter, one where I'm visible from the start. We'll miss you here, Lisa said. But you know what? I think that's the right call. That night, I sat at my window overlooking Brooklyn, laptop open to the email where I would either accept or decline the Seattle position. The cursor blinked patiently, waiting for my decision. I thought about the mint green room prepared just for me, about Dylan asking for my professional advice, about my name becoming part of my niece's identity, about dinners with Mateo that held interesting possibilities, about the scholarship that would help girls like me be seen from the start. I thought about the invisible girl I had been and the visible woman I had become, about code that operates silently but changes everything, about bridges rebuilt, slowly but intentionally. I clicked reply and began to type my acceptance. Tomorrow, I would start planning my return to Seattle, not as an escape from New York, but as a conscious choice to build something new while reclaiming something old, not as the overlooked daughter desperate for validation, but as Dr. Leah Kim, quantum security expert, Turing Award nominee, respected professional, and perhaps now, beloved daughter and sister too. I thought about what Professor Alvarez had told me all those years ago. You have a special talent, Leah. Don't let anyone make you feel less. I hadn't, and I never would again. Outside my window, the Brooklyn lights shimmered against the night sky. Soon, I would see Seattle's lights instead, but this time, I wouldn't be looking at them through tears of rejection, but through eyes open to new possibilities. I hit send on my acceptance email, then closed my laptop. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. The invisible girl was gone forever. In her place stood a woman impossible to overlook, carrying her own light wherever she went. Home, I realized, wasn't Seattle or New York. It was the space I had created within myself, the confidence, the skills, the self-worth that no one could take away. Everything else was just geography. I turned off the lights in my Brooklyn apartment one last time that night, but I wasn't leaving anything behind in darkness. I was carrying it all forward into a future bright with possibility.